I think, to me, the magic of plein air painting is in the relationship between the artist and their environment. It's not so much about the painting itself, but about being present in the moment. Just detaching from the rest of the world and truly taking in space for what it is. It gives you time to appreciate and reflect and time to breathe. It's too easy, especially in today's world, to get caught up in the bustle and forget the beauty, because it is beautiful, and painting in nature gives me the opportunity to remember that. Once you start painting outdoors, you start to see the world a little bit differently. Start noticing the nuances that you normally would overlook. And once you learn to appreciate a rock or a branch, suddenly everything is something worth admiring. And I think that's what makes it worth doing.
Hey everyone, welcome to Season 2 of Foltz Studio. Today we are in Montgomery, Vermont. We're going to do a beautiful mountain scene. These are some of my favorites. And I think with this one, we're going to kind of have the mountains on the lower part. We're going to add some sky in there just to give it a little bit more interest. And I think this is going to be good. So, as always, we're going to start out with a burnt umber wash over the whole canvas. I always do this just to kind of knock that bright white canvas down a few notches. It makes it a little easier to look at, but the other benefit is it makes it easier to judge the colors that you've mixed. So if you're laying colors you've mixed on top of a white canvas, they're always going to look a little too dark, even when they're the right color. So if you tone your canvas first, you can kind of help avoid that. Give yourself a nice neutral tone to work on top of. And I'm going to make this wash by just thinning down some of my paint with mineral spirits and scrubbing it on. I'm not going to be too careful about this. You really don't have to be. We'll wipe this around with a paper towel in a minute just to get it spread evenly. But we do want it to kind of cover most of the surface. All right. Yeah, maybe a little more in here. Okay. Now that we've got that on there, take a paper towel and spread it out a bit. Now these panels I'm using today, they're watercolor panels. So what's nice about those is you can oil paint on top of them. We're using oil paints here. But they have very little texture to them. So a regular canvas panel will have a lot of rough canvas texture that will show through your paint. These ones really show off your brushwork in a nice way. The only downside is they're a little more absorbent because they're intended for watercolor. So they're a little more absorbent. Your paint will dry slightly faster. That could be a plus or a negative, depending on how you view it. Let's just get a little bit more of that down there. Okay. And this does not have to be perfect. I just want to cover that canvas for the most part. All right, and that's probably good enough. So now that we've got the canvas stained, I can come in. I'm going to use the same burnt umber paint to sort of sketch my composition in. And like I said, I still want the scale of these mountains to be there, but I do want there to be enough room for sky. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I mark this out. I want definitely some of that field back there. So this area will be sort of where the mountains come down and interact with that field a bit. And some of that shrubbery kind of comes around like this into those foreground trees. And I think I want the peak of my tallest mountain, which will probably be this one over here, to be about right there. So I'm going to mark that out. And these trees over here. We'll start with the trees just so that I can get the scale of everything kind of the way that I want it. Mark in some of these. The trees kind of taper out as we get farther and farther away. That's where our trees will be. And you know what? Here. If you ever make a mistake, because oil paint stays wet for so long, you can just come in with a paper towel and kind of wipe some of that away. I think I actually want to shrink those trees so that I can include more of the mountain range. So, let's see. We'll call that the end of the tree line. And this big tree here will be a little more this size. There we go. That'll just help us include more of that mountain range and give us that nice scale. I want these mountains to feel big. There we go, that's our new tree line. And then from that tree line here, we have a slope that comes out here. I'm going to follow that all the way up to the peak of this first mountain here and into the peak of the second. And then we've got the last mountain right in here. There we go. I think this is a pretty good setup. So this gives us plenty of room for some sky, and I think we'll be able to make this feel like a very big painting. So that's about all I really need for my initial block in. So let's get some colors on our palette. Today, I'm going to be using a palette of burnt umber, ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow light, alizarin crimson, and titanium white. I may add just a touch of permanent green to that palette as well. That'll kind of help us knock in some of these closer trees and things. Let's see. Oh, pardon me. It looks like this is actually permanent yellow light. Now, cadmium yellow light, permanent yellow light, they're pretty close. Permanent yellow light is a little better, I think, because cadmium yellow tends to turn a little gray when you add white into it. We're not going to get that problem as much with the permanent yellow light. Okay. And here we go. Hey. Huh?
Good job.
Will do. Okay. Now as I start laying in my colors, I'd like to start with the sky. The sky is almost always going to be the lightest part of your painting. And then as you move closer and closer to the foreground, things are going to get darker and darker and darker. So let's start with that sky. And for that, I'm just kind of loosely mixing up a little bit of blue and a little bit of white. And initially, I'm just gonna haphazardly slap it on. Not being too careful here. I'm gonna allow some of the orange to poke through, some of that underpainting, just to add a little bit of visual interest into the sky, since it'll likely have the least amount of detail. But because we have so much sky in this painting, I will be taking a little more time to work on the clouds. There we go. There's a spot for a nice cloud there. Oops. I got a little red in my blue. All right, that's okay. We'll just mix a new color down here. And there we go. You can see some of that red is getting into my sky color, but you know what? It's not the worst thing ever. I kind of like it, so we're just gonna roll with it. And I'm okay with painting into the mountains just a little bit. I can always come back in and cover that up with different paint as I move along. All right. And get that a little more colorful. We've got a good base there, so now I can start marking in where I want a few of my clouds to be. It's easy to accidentally make the underside of clouds too dark, so I'm going to be careful not to go too dark with them. But the underside of those clouds is going to have a little bit of shadow on them, so I'll come in with a bit of a gray here. Mark in where I want the bottom of some of those clouds to be. And I really want them to feel sort of big and imposing. There we go. That'll be a good spot. And let's see, a couple more over here for good measure. Can never hurt. Now we can start getting in the brighter areas of those clouds. So for that, I usually use white with just a touch of yellow. Sometimes there's not always yellow in the highlights of clouds, but it will really help those brighter parts of the clouds stand out against your blue sky if you add just a hint of yellow. So that's what I'm going to do here. And I'm just touching the tops of those clouds to bring that light out. There we go. You don't need much to make a cloud look like a cloud. And I'm kind of just letting my brush work its way around a little haphazardly. Just enough to get the impression. Okay, and that feels pretty good for my cloudy sky. I'm going to step back and take a look at it from a distance. There we go. I like that quite a lot. So now we're going to move down to those distant mountains. So anytime you've got mountains off in the distance, they're usually going to be kind of blue, a little foggy looking. So for those, I'm going to mix up sort of a light grayish blue, maybe just a hint of red. And I'll make them a little bit lighter than what I'm actually seeing, just to really give it that feeling of distance. I really want them to feel large and relatively far away. And that might be a bit darker than I'd like to go, so let's lighten that up a bit. At least for those farther off mountains. There we go, that's much better. And as these mountains move in towards the viewer, they're going to get darker. The colors are going to get a little more prominent, a little more vibrant. So as I move it in, a bit more blue, a bit more red, and eventually we'll kind of push those colors a little more towards green in the foreground. And you'll see pretty quickly here how it gives the impression of distant mountains coming forward. And again, just a little bit at a time. There we go. Feels pretty good there. All right. And this next step forward, that's when I'll start hinting at a little bit of green in these mountains. They are covered in trees, so I don't want them to look like, you know, I want to make sure that they read as having trees all over them. There we go. We just got a hint of green in there. And we'll come down into this area here. Now notice I'm kind of working in just my shadows to begin with. I can always come in and add my highlights on top of my shadows, but especially when plein air painting, getting your shadows in first is good because your light might change, but your shadow colors will mostly stay the same. So if you get all your shadow colors knocked in first, even if your light changes on you, you'll be okay. All right, and finally, ooh, there's a wonderful thing happening here where the cloud is casting a shadow onto the peak of that mountain. And I think that's something that I'd really like to include in the final painting. So that will likely change. And there'll be a lot of moments like that when you're plein air painting where you see something you really like, but it's only there for a second. So if you see something like that, you really want it to stick around to the end, you just gotta store it away in your head. Don't forget to make sure that that stays there through the final painting. Okay, and here we've got a pretty good start. And while I'm working in this darker green, I'll go ahead and mark in the trees on the other side. They are mostly the same color of green, so might as well get them in while we can. They're also very backlit, so a lot of these trees is going to stay in shadow. Again, starting with my shadow colors, just marking in the general shapes of these trees. Okay. And while I'm at it, we might as well get some of this ground in here before we move on to detail stuff. This really nice patch of sort of this yellowish shrubbery that is working its way up the mountain here. So I'm going to indicate that. And then we'll get our grass in. And I may brighten this up just a tad later, but for now, just need an indication that there's grass there. And man, we lucked out. It is a beautiful sunny day today. As long as it's not too hot, sunny days are always great days to paint. You get great light, great shadows. You can really come out with something that looks very interesting by the end of it. Okay. Now that we've got the sort of basics laid out, I'm going to come in and start working on some of the details. And this is the stage where it's really easy to start getting overwhelmed, you know? But remember, details can sort of be simplified, and as long as they give the impression of what it is you're trying to show, that's enough. That's all you really need. So I'm going to come in with this brush here. It's a bit smaller than the one I was working on before. And I want to add sort of the highlights to some of the tops of these trees on this mountain. That will also help sort of tell the story of the shape of this mountain. Here we go. And you can see as I'm working these in, how much that mountain range is going to go from being a very flat, sort of sterile looking mountain to something that has a lot of shape and dimension and character. Got more back here. And again, by kind of letting my brush dance around a little, it adds just like a little bit of randomness and sort of gives the impression of detail without me having to go in and carefully paint every tree. As we move forward in these highlighted areas, I'm going to be slowly adding just a little bit more yellow to my mixture. Kind of make those colors stand out a bit more in the foreground. Now remember, we wanted the top of this mountain to be in shadow, so as I move towards the peak, I will sort of let off a little bit and let that peak stay shadowy the whole way through. Okay. And also as I move forward, I'll start adding a little bit of different colors into my mixtures just to break up that sameness. Oh, maybe some of the trees are a little more yellow and some of them are a little more brown. There we go. And the closer I get to the foreground, I want to be a little more deliberate about the shape of individual trees. Let's get a couple little pops of a brighter yellow in there. Certainly can't hurt. Okay. Main part of the mountain range there. Now I want to make sure I get some of the trees closer to the foreground. I'll just make sure that they're a touch darker and the shape is a little more defined as we move in. Just a bit. I like that. It's kind of a nice division here where these more shrub-like areas are meeting up with the open field. It's casting a little shadow into it. I'll try to get some of that in there. Okay. And I'll step back to take a look from a distance. I'm liking it. Now, of course, these trees are going to be fun to work on, and the field is important, but really what I like is this shrubby area up at the base of this mountain, so that's where I want to focus next. I'm just going to kind of pour some attention into that while we can. A few highlights on these trees here. And I do love how this scene is mostly backlit, so in a lot of ways that can really help show the form of all of this stuff, because it's sort of got a little halo of light right around the whole shape of each tree. Maybe a bit more light in there. Okay. And you can really see how adding these little highlights to these areas is what makes them feel three-dimensional, like an object that's out in the scene rather than just a shadow or a splotch of paint. But every time I give one of these trees its own little special treatment, it really steps forward as a concrete thing that's out there. All right. And now for those sort of yellowy shrubs out there. And I'm maybe just going to add a touch of red to this mixture so they really stand out against the green. I want you to be able to tell that those are not the same color as everything else. And again, I'm just going to kind of tap the canvas with the brush. I'm letting the paint kind of sit on there however it feels like. And that's going to give it a really natural, believable feel. All right. And while we've got that color on our brush, might as well add a little bit of it to the shrubs over on this other side. I do see some of it in there as well. All right. And now that all of that's laid in, I'm kind of looking at this and feeling like some of the trees in the mountain and at the base of the mountain could use a little bit of a brighter pop. So let's go ahead. I've mixed a little bit of extra white and yellow into that initial mixture I had. And just gonna give them a little pop of light. I don't want to overdo it, but I do want them to stand out a little bit more than they are. Feels pretty nice. Do the same with these trees back here. Okay. And just a touch of this brighter color up on the mountain. I'm not going to put it everywhere. I like the idea that this is a cloudy scene, so there are some shadows of those clouds hitting these mountains. So you might get areas where the light on the mountains is a little brighter in some spots than others. And that really kind of can give it a really picturesque and cinematic feel when you make sure to include that into the painting. There we go. That feels pretty good. Maybe just a tad bit more on this distant part of the mountain. Okay. And as I work through this, I'm liking the idea of having it feel like there's almost a spotlight right here in the middle. So why don't we try to encourage that look a bit? And I'll bring that bright spotlight down into the grass as well. Right here. There we go. Now we are really brightening up that area. That looks nice. I like that. And I'll blend it out so it looks a little more natural. There we go, that's pretty good. And last but not least, these trees need a little bit of love, so let's get that in there. I'll start with the brighter areas in the part of the tree that's still in shadow. But you know, sort of got some light from the sky that catches on those branches. We got a nice cool green in those areas. Again, I don't want to overdo any of this. Just giving the impression of it. That seems good. And a little bit more in these ones in the back. Okay, I like that quite a bit. We'll lighten this shadow up just a little towards the back so we can again kind of encourage the idea that those trees are farther away. They're a little more foggy and a little more blue because they're sitting farther back in the scene. There we go. Now, we can start working in some of those highlights. Oh, look at that. The sun's coming out just for us. Okay. And I love the way the sun is hitting those trees right now. So, perfect timing. I'm going to try to start marking that in before it goes away again. I don't want to make it too bright, but bright enough that you can tell that, hey, that section of the tree is in the sunlight, really catching it. All right. Let's see. Step back and see if that worked. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. And I'll just repeat that same kind of process as I move backwards into the scene here. But I will sort of make those colors a bit bluer. Again, that just helps push it back, make it feel a little more distant. And again, because I want that spotlight feel right in the middle, I'll probably brighten up those highlights that are closer to that area. See if we can't make it feel a little bit more like a spotlight in there. Oops. All right. Let's take another quick step back. All right, I think that is looking pretty good. Let's see. The only thing I'm not quite feeling here is I'd like to break up this flat grassy plain just a tad. So I'm gonna mix together a bit of an orangish color and probably a bit too dark. You can wipe that away. Let's go brighter with that. There we go. Just a bit of an orangey color. And I'm just gonna, again, sort of tap my brush along the surface, help break up that solid grassy plain just a bit. All right. Now's a good time. I feel like we've got a really good foundation for a painting here, And we can start whittling in just a few final details to really send this one home. So I'm going to take a step back, take a look at it from a distance, and see how I feel about it. Let's see. Okay. I love this spotlight that I went for here. So in my final stretch here, I just want to sort of encourage that spotlight and add a little extra color where I can. I'll get a bit more yellow here. Just a touch. Okay. Let's see. There we go. Can really get just a little bit of light in here. And if you ever find that you're having a hard time mixing a color that feels bright enough, what you can do is just lay it on in thicker globs. Then the light sort of catches off of that paint and it will make it glow a lot more. Okay. That feels good. We'll carry this same sort of energy one more time back up into the trees on the mountain. And I'm kind of just tracing out these curved shapes where the light is catching the top of the tree. Just adding a few of those in really helps indicate the shape of a tree without having to paint the whole thing. And these detail stages of a painting are really where you can kind of start to slow down and be a little bit more careful and meticulous about how you want to put the paint on. I actually like what that's done a lot. Now the smaller you try to indicate these trees, the bigger the mountain will feel. And that's really, really what I want to get. That big mountain feel, so. There we go. And just because we can, we've got a little bit more time here. Let's do just some of this off in the distance. sometimes you surprise yourself. And this is definitely one of those occasions. It can be hard to capture the scale of a mountain, but I feel like today we've done a pretty good job at that. All right. And I think I really like it there. So with that, we can call this painting finished. I think it came out great. I hope it was helpful. Thank you for sticking around with us today, and I will see you later.
How do you paint loose? If you come from a drawing background like I do, learning how to sort of loosen up and have a more impressionistic painting can be a task. But in my experience, learning how to paint loose is all about recognizing your diminishing returns. You'll notice in this painting that the first portion is really just covering the canvas in rough colors so that I can see if my composition is working and get an idea of the big picture. And all of the work that I'm doing after that kind of has less and less of an impact on the image. Any artist can tell you that it's really hard to figure out when to stop working on a painting. And there is no real end point. You could continue to refine your painting forever and ever, but at some point, it's just not going to do any good. And when it comes to loose painting, the big picture is what really matters. So if loose is what you're going for, you should establish that at the very beginning. Leave your details for later and just get your rough colors and big shapes in place. And as you're adding your details, frequently step like 10 feet back and ask, is this still serving my painting? And as soon as the answer is no, it's time to move on.
So I got into International Artist Magazine, allegedly. It's hard to really be sure these days with the scams just running rampant. I also got invited onto the Mike Rowe podcast recently, and then they wanted to charge me to attend. So, I guess it'll feel real to me once the article's actually out there. But yeah, I was contacted back in October by the editor of International Artist Magazine with a request to do a demo for an article. And after some research to verify it was real, obviously I said yes. And it was a surprisingly difficult task. It took me 2 months to complete all of the material for the article. And you're looking at it right now. This is the painting I did as a demo for International. I still don't know if I'm supposed to be sharing this or not, but we'll see. The article will essentially be an in-depth breakdown of my entire process, the materials I use, why I make the decisions I make, so on and so forth. I still have no idea when it's going to be published or what the article will look like, but trust me, as soon as I have information, you guys will be the first to know.